The air on Delvux 9 was dry enough to crack lips open in minutes and hot enough to blister skin in under an hour. The planet had 2 suns and no patience for anything with a circulatory system. Most species that dared step outside without a full thermal suit didn't step out twice. Private Zuran of the Selection Ground Corps stood at the edge of the outpost's perimeter, his armor humming faintly as it regulated his internal temperature. He had been assigned to monitor human behavior at Outpost Theta, a joint research facility buried in red sand and reinforced carbon alloy. The humans were odd, fragile, fleshy, and yet inexplicably stubborn about staying alive in environments that should have killed them twice. A figure approached from the northern ridge, limping slightly, the gait uneven. Zuran raised his scanner, expecting perhaps another desert crawler or one of those sand-burrowing reptiles that occasionally chewed through comms wiring. But the shape was wrong. Too tall. Humanoid. Then he saw the skin. The man was shirtless, his upper body a patchwork of angry red and mottled pink. Blisters had formed along the shoulder and side of the neck, and his face was swollen on the right. He was dragging a water pack behind him, half-crusted with dust, and his breathing was shallow but determined. Zuran stepped forward. "Stop. Identify yourself." The man grunted and dropped the water pack with a thud. Oscar Allen. Research Logistics. I was out with the solar drone crew. Got separated." Zuran stared at the burn covering Oscar's right arm and chest. "You were injured." "Severely." "Why did you not request extraction?" Oscar tilted his head and, despite the pain clearly etched into every wrinkle near his eyes, muttered, "Relax, it's just a suntan." Zuran's head recoiled slightly. "That is not a tan. Your epidermal layer is liquefying." Oscar coughed, then hissed as the motion pulled at his raw skin. "Yeah, figure that out around hour 2. Drone got fried. Comms went with it. Walked back. What's that, 10 miles? Zuran tilted his scanner toward the horizon. 14. In direct exposure. Cool. Felt like 20. The alien watched as Oscar slumped under the shade of a supply canopy. The human's lips cracked further as he tried to smile. Zuran activated his comm, medical, deployed a northern gate. Severe dermal trauma. Human male. Unassisted return from Sector Delta. Oscar's head lolled back. Tell them to bring painkillers. And maybe a cold beer. Within minutes, 2 medics, 1 human, 1 Selection arrived in a joint evac unit. The human, a woman with tightly braided auburn hair and a blue patch labeled Dr. Willa Madsen, knelt beside Oscar and began assessing the damage. "How long were you exposed?" she asked, gently peeling away the melted fabric stuck to his ribs. "Couple hours," he muttered. "Maybe 3. You're looking at second-degree burns across a third of your torso. We're going to need to start fluids and get you under cooling therapy immediately." Oscar gave a faint thumbs up. "Sounds like a spot, eh?" Willa didn't laugh. Zuran watched as they loaded Oscar onto the stretcher, his skin already being misted by a vapor cooling hose. He followed the unit back to the medbay, curious. Humans were often confusing. They suffered and then joked about it. They bled and then asked for lunch. It was illogical, but also formidable. In the medbay, Oscar drifted in and out of consciousness. Willa and her team worked methodically, cleaning the burns, applying hydrogel patches, inserting in 4 drip. Zuran stood quietly by the door, observing. "Why did he not activate his emergency beacon?" he asked. "He probably tried," Willa said without looking up. "Those solar drones give off a weird EM field. We've had trouble with equipment around them before. He was just unlucky. Unlucky and injured." Yet he walked 14 miles. Alone. "Yeah," she said, pausing to wipe her brow. "That's Oscar." Zuran looked at the man on the cot, his face paler now, sweat replaced by the artificial chill of the medbay's controlled climate. He claimed it was a suntan. Willa raised an eyebrow. He would. Over the next few days, Oscar remained largely bedridden. The burns were cleaned twice daily, and he was kept on pain management and hydration therapy. Movement was minimal, just enough to prevent muscle atrophy. Zuran visited twice, each time noting how Oscar would crack a joke even when grimacing in pain. On day 5, Oscar was able to sit upright. His torso was wrapped in translucent bandages and his right arm still throbbed when he moved it, but he was healing. Slowly. Zuran entered quietly. "Hey, metal man," Oscar said, wincing as he shifted on the cot. "Back to marvel at the wonders of SPF-0? Zuran approached. "I do not understand your insistence on humor while injured." Oscar shrugged. "It's just how we deal. If I start crying, I won't stop. So, better to laugh, right?" Zuran considered that. "You are recovering at a rate deemed acceptable by your species standards. You will regain full mobility in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Oscar sighed. "That's gonna kill my fantasy baseball team." Zuran blinked. "You engage in sport simulation while incapacitated? It's a whole thing. Don't try to understand it." Later that week, a field team prepared to return to Sector Delta to recover the damaged drone. Oscar, still confined to light duty, watched from the medbay window. Willa entered, holding a tablet with his latest vitals. "You're improving. Another few days and we'll start light physical therapy." Oscar raised his eyebrows. "Already? Thought I'd have more time to milk this. You want to stay in here longer?" "Not really. Food sucks." She smiled faintly for the first time. "Then behave. No more unplanned desert marathons." As she turned to leave, he said, "Hey, Willa." She stopped. "Thanks for patching me up." She nodded. "Don't make a habit of needing it." By week 3, Oscar was walking again, slowly. His arm was still tight, the skin new and pink, but he could move it. Zuran met him outside the mebe. "You are ambulatory. Fancy word for walking." "Yeah. I reviewed your medical log. Your injuries were severe, yet you returned alone. You did not panic." Oscar shrugged. "Didn't have time to panic. I had a choice. Sit and die, or walk and maybe die later." Walking sounded better. Zuran paused. Selection soldiers are trained in endurance, yet few would have survived such exposure. "Well," Oscar said, rubbing his shoulder, "guess I got lucky." Zuran tilted his head. "Or you were simply hard to kill." Oscar laughed, then winced. "Easy there, I'm still tender." Zuran looked out toward the horizon. "I still do not understand your initial response." "What, the suntan thing?" "Yes. You were in pain." Oscar exhaled. "That's kind of the point. Laughing makes it feel smaller. Like I'm still in control." "I see." They stood in silence for a moment, the desert wind kicking up red dust beyond the perimeter. "You know," Oscar said, "next time, I'm bringing an umbrella." "There will not be a next time," Zuran replied. Oscar grinned. "You say that like you're in charge." "I am." Oscar laughed again, then coughed. "Okay, fair." As the sun dipped below the ridge, Oscar turned back toward the facility, his pace slow but steady. Zuran watched him go, then looked toward the spot where the man had first appeared, skin blistered, lips cracked, but alive. It was not logic that had carried him those 14 miles. It was something else entirely. The next morning, before the twin suns had fully broken the horizon, the outpost mess hall was already humming with life. Only a few humans were present, most still asleep or recovering from the previous rotation's shift. The selection contingent, however, operated on a rotational cycle dictated by gravitational alignment, and to them it was late afternoon. Zuran sat at a narrow steel table near the hydration station, his exosuit folded and stored, dark scales exposed to the ambient air. He was watching Oscar. Oscar, still bandaged along his ribs and upper arm, moved gingerly as he filled a plastic cup with a dark liquid that had been labeled coffee. He sipped once, recoiled, then took another sip anyway. His face was less swollen now, though mottled discoloration stretched from his jaw down to his collarbone. He walked with a slight hitch, like his right hip hadn't fully returned to cooperating. "You are not cleared for stimulant intake," Zuran said without looking up from his nutrient block. "Technically, I'm not cleared for stairs either," Oscar replied, nursing the cup like it owed him a debt. "But the elevator's down again and I really wanted a muffin." "There are none." "I noticed." Oscar lowered himself into the seat across from Zuran with a grunt. His shirt clung awkwardly to the healing skin on his torso and he tugged at the fabric until it settled. A faint antiseptic scent clung to him. "I reviewed the team's drone footage from yesterday," Zuran said. "The retrieval was unsuccessful. The drone's core is irreparably fused." "Well, that's 35 million credits straight into the sand," Oscar muttered. It is unclear why your species continues to rely on such fragile devices. Because we're even more fragile, and I'd rather lose a drone than another layer of skin. Zuran blinked slowly. Your logic is sound. Oscar tapped the rim of his cup thoughtfully. You know, I've been thinking. If the EM field scrambles everything within a 20-meter radius, wouldn't it make more sense to send in a fiber-tethered crawler with analog relays instead? Something dumb enough not to fry. Zuran leaned back just slightly. That would bypass the interference. Exactly. Old-school rack crawler with a spool, maybe 20 clicks of line. No fancy NAV AI, just a basic terrain map and some gyros. Let the thing stumble around like it's 1980 again. Zuran considered the proposal. Your species has a pattern of reverting to outdated technologies under duress. Sometimes the old hammer still hits the nail. A selection technician approached, antennae twitching at the scent of Oscar's coffee. Is that the same compound that caused agitation in the sleep study volunteers? Oscar held up the cup. Yup. Triple roast. Want a sip? The technician recoiled, eyes narrowing. I would rather ingest boiling sand. Oscar raised the cup in mock salute. To each their poison. Zuran waited until the technician had left before speaking again. You continue to interact socially despite suboptimal physical condition. It would be more efficient to remain in recovery. I spent 4 days staring at ceiling tiles and listening to my own drip. I'd take a room full of twitchy lizard bugs over that any day. I am not a lizard. Didn't say you were. But your buddy there? Little on the gecko side. Zuran ignored the provocation. You also continue to reject pain suppressants. They make me foggy. Foggy? Slow. Like I'm underwater. I'd rather hurt and think straight than float around like a dazed jellyfish. Zuran gave a slow nod. You prioritize clarity over comfort. Oscar leaned forward, elbows on the table. You ever get injured? Yes. What's the worst? Exposure to a magnetic decompression field. My left arm was severed below the elbow. It regrew. Oscar blinked. Regrew? Over 8 days. Oscar sat back. Okay. That's cheating. It is standard for my species. He tapped the table thoughtfully. Still, I bet it hurt. Zuran did not respond immediately. It was unpleasant. Oscar's eyes darted toward the window where a dust storm rolled lazily across the northern basin. I used to think pain was the enemy. But it's not. Pain tells you you're still in the fight. He stood slowly, bracing himself on the edge of the table. Zuran watched him. Where are you going? They've got me on light duty. Inventory recon. I get to count boxes in a room that smells like old rubber and dead batteries. Living the dream. I will accompany you. Oscar raised an eyebrow. Gonna help me alphabetize thermal couplers? No. I will observe. The storage corridor was dim, lit only by narrow ceiling strips that flickered occasionally. The floor plating creaked under Oscar's uneven gait. Rows of crates lined the walls, each tagged with a color-coded strip and a numeric designation. He grabbed a scanner from the wall hook and began passing it over the crates one by one. I hate this part, he muttered. Feels like I'm scanning groceries. Zuran followed behind silently, noting how Oscar's left hand trembled slightly when he lifted the heavier crates for inspection. You are not fully stabilized. Tell that to Commander Vesh. He said if I could walk, I could work. Zuran tilted his head. I will speak to him. No, Oscar said quickly. If you do that, they'll just reassign me to data entry. I'd rather die surrounded by broken fuses than spreadsheets. He paused at a crate marked with a faded red sticker and squinted. This one shouldn't be here. It's from the old mining camp. Zuran stepped closer. That facility was decommissioned. Exactly. Which means this crate's been sitting in a sand-blasted ruin for 6 years. And now it's here. He pried open the lid with a metal tool from his belt. Inside were spools of corroded wiring, a cracked panel, and a small black case with a faded logo. Zuran scanned the contents. Radiation levels are elevated. Minimal but above baseline. Oscar pulled a cloth from a nearby shelf and wrapped it around the case. I'll take it to containment. You are not cleared for hazardous material transport. Oscar glanced at him. Then walk with me so I don't get vaporized. That way, if it explodes, you can say I didn't go alone. Zuran narrowed his eyes but said nothing. They crossed the outpost's main corridor, passing a group of Varkari observers who watched Oscar with undisguised curiosity. One leaned toward the others and whispered something, their lips vibrating in short bursts. Oscar ignored them. Inside the containment lab, the human technician on duty raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Oscar laid the wrapped bundle on the intake table. "Stray crate from the old camp. You'll want to scan it before breathing too close." The technician ran a wand slowly over the surface. "Mild isotopes. Nothing critical. Probably an old core regulator." Oscar rubbed his arm absently. "Still, might want to tag it for disposal." Zuran stepped forward. "He should not be handling such items during recovery." The technician shrugged. "He's here under Commander Vesh's orders. If he says he's fit, he's fit." Oscar gave a faint wave. "See? Certified semi-functional." Back in the corridor, they walked in silence for a while. Oscar's breathing was heavier now and he stopped to lean against the wall. "You are deteriorating," Zuran said. "I'm fine. Just winded." "You are not fine." Oscar closed his eyes for a moment. "If I stop moving, I start thinking. And if I start thinking, I remember how close I came to not making it back." Zuran studied him. "You fear stillness. I fear what comes with it." Another pause. "You should rest," Zuran said. Oscar opened one eye. "Yeah, maybe." He pushed off the wall and resumed walking, slower this time. Zuran stayed beside him. They returned to the medbay just as the sun dipped below the distant ridge. The corridor lights adjusted automatically, dimming in response. "Dr. Madsen met them at the door. "You're late for your check-in." Oscar shrugged. "Had to play archaeologist." She gave him a look that hovered somewhere between exasperation and concern. "Vitals, now?" As she led him inside, Zuran remained at the threshold. He watched as Oscar settled onto the exam bench, his movements careful but uncomplaining. Dr. Madsen attached a monitor to his arm. "You know your heart rate's been elevated since this morning." Oscar glanced at the screen. "Maybe I'm excited to be alive." She didn't laugh. "You need to slow down." "I'm trying." Zuran turned and walked away, the medbay door hissing closed behind him. He had read hundreds of dossiers on human physiology. He had watched battle footage, survival recordings, even civilian interviews. But none of it had prepared him for the quiet, relentless defiance of a man who refused to stop moving not because he wanted to, but because the alternative scared him more. And somehow that made him harder to understand than any battlefield hero. Harder and far more dangerous. The air inside the physical therapy wing smelled faintly of synthetic aloe and ozone. The walls were a soft off-white, more functional than comforting, and the lighting was fixed on a wavelength calibrated to minimize eye strain for both species. Oscar sat on the edge of a padded bench, shirt off, right arm raised slightly as a compact drone hovered nearby, tracking his muscle range. The bandages were gone. In their place, a rough lattice of healed skin stretched across his ribs and shoulder, pink and taut. "You're stiff," said Dr. Madsen, crouched beside him with a handheld stim wand. "You'll need to work through the tightness or it's going to stay like this." Oscar winced as she applied the device to a knot of scar tissue just below his collarbone. "Feels like someone wrapped my torso in cheap duct tape." "You'll get used to it. Skin's still adjusting to the new collagen. That tightness will ease if you keep moving." "I've been moving," he muttered. "Ask Zuran. He's been tailing me like I owe him rent. He told me you nearly dropped a containment crate yesterday." "It slipped." "You slipped." "Semantics." She turned the stim wand off and stood. "You've got 4 more sessions of manual therapy, then I can clear you for regular duty. Until then, no heavy lifting, no field operations, and no, you can't just help out for a minute in the reactor core again. Wasn't my fault the coolant unit had a loose bracket. You were holding a wrench while limping." Oscar grabbed a towel and wiped his arm. "I'll behave." Across the room, Zuran stood near the monitoring terminal, arms folded. 2 Silection med techs were calibrating the drone's feedback loop, adjusting the torque sensors and analyzing range of motion graphs without a word. Oscar caught Zuran's eye. "You ever go through recovery like this?" I do not require soft tissue regeneration. When our dermis tears, it sheds and is replaced. So no stretching, no stims, no feeling like your nerves are being peeled with a butter knife. No, lucky you. Dr. Madsen walked over to the terminal and began reviewing the latest scans. You've got inflammation here, she said, pointing to a reddish swell on the digital overlay of Oscar's upper arm. Too much use, not enough rest. Oscar leaned over to see. Looks like abstract art. Looks like you're pushing too hard. Zuran motioned toward the swelling. What is the function of that region? Deltoid muscle, she said. Lifts the arm, stabilizes the shoulder. Oscar raised his arm experimentally and grimaced. Right now it mostly functions as a pain delivery system. You should not be lifting crates, Zuran said. I'm not. You lifted one yesterday. Fine. I'm not lifting them anymore. Dr. Madsen tapped through the scan results. You're healing well considering the initial trauma. But if you don't let the tissue settle, you'll risk rupturing the new layers. Oscar sighed. I'm doing my best not to fall apart. Zuran stepped closer. Why do you not allow others to assist? I'm not afraid to ask for help. You do not ask. Oscar tossed the towel onto the bench. If I ask, it becomes real. The weakness. The part that says I can't do it alone. There is no dishonor in recovery. For you maybe. You regenerate. I rebuild. Dr. Madsen didn't interrupt. She simply uploaded the session data and left the display running, then crossed to the supply cabinet. Zuran tilted his head. If you collapse again, the burden on others will increase. Oscar leaned back against the bench, only half joking. So this is a guilt trip. It is an observation. I get it. I'm not invincible. No one is. They sat in silence for a moment while the drone powered down and docked itself in the wall unit. One of the selection techs quietly exited, leaving the room quieter, heavier. Oscar rubbed his shoulder. I used to be proud of my pain tolerance. Thought it made me tougher. Zuran studied him. And now? Now I think maybe I just didn't know what real pain felt like. Dr. Madsen returned with a thin strip of flexible mesh. Compression wrap, she said. Keeps the inflammation down. Wear it for at least 6 hours a day. Oscar took it and started winding it around his upper arm. She continued, you'll get full function back if you stop treating recovery like a punishment. I'm not you are, she said. You're trying to outpace your own body. Zuran stepped forward. He fears stagnation. Oscar looked up, surprised. You getting philosophical now? I am reporting observable behavior. Dr. Madsen gave a short nod. He's not wrong. Oscar finished securing the wrap and flexed his arm slightly. So what do you want me to do? Sit around and think about what almost happened. If that's what it takes to slow you down, yes. Zuran turned to her. His behavior is common among human soldiers. You refer to it as pushing through. Yeah, she said. We don't always know when to stop. Oscar stood cautiously. Maybe we just don't want to admit that something broke. Zuran regarded him for a long moment. You returned from the desert because you refused to surrender. But this is not the desert. Oscar didn't respond. He adjusted the compression wrap and walked toward the exit. Dr. Madsen called after him, you'll be back here tomorrow. Don't skip. He paused at the door. Wouldn't dream of it. Later that evening, the outpost's observation deck was nearly empty. A few selections stood by the perimeter railing, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the twin suns had finally dipped below the ridge. The sky turned a deep violet, streaked with thin bands of gold. Oscar stood alone, arms resting on the railing, breathing slowly. The wind was cooler at this hour, easier on the lungs. His shoulder ached, but the compression wrap helped. He wasn't sure if it was the pressure or just the act of doing something about it. Zuran approached without a sound. You do not usually come here, Oscar said. I was advised to observe human methods of stress mitigation. Well, Oscar said, welcome to contemplative loitering. They stood together, watching the lights flicker on across the facility's outer wall. You have not made another joke about your injuries, Zuran said. Oscar nodded. They're not funny anymore. Because they still hurt? Because I understand them now. Zuran glanced at him. You feared being seen as wounded. Yeah. But hiding it didn't make it go away. The sky darkened further, stars beginning to emerge, faint pinpricks against the deepening blue. Zuran said, Your species is vulnerable, yet you persist. Oscar exhaled slowly. We do a lot with very little. I have seen that. He turned to leave, then paused. You were not alone out there. Oscar looked over. Felt like I was. You are not now. Oscar stayed at the railing as Zuran walked away. The wind picked up slightly, brushing his skin with a chill that would have been unbearable not long ago. Now it just felt like weather. He looked down at the wrap on his arm, then out at the desert beyond the walls. The pain was still there, but it was quieter. And for the first time since the sun had burned him raw, he didn't feel like he had to outrun it.